Good evening. Today I want to have a chat about what has Invicta, the new Invicta, to do with the old Swiss Invicta brands. So, as every Invicta holic knows, Invicta started in 1837 in Switzerland, started by Raphael Picard. So he is the first guy who started with Invicta in 1837. He started with producing simple and sometimes also um, complicated pocket watches. So in the past, people didn't wear, men didn't wear wristwatches, but they worn pocket watches. That was the fashion of that time. So Invicta started with an factory around 1900s at the Avenue Leopold Robert in Le Chaux de Fonds. But then the quartz crisis started and Invicta got bankrupted. And they are bought and brought to America. So is the old Invicta and the new Invicta, what has they to do with each other? So lately, a lot of watch collectors just getting more interested into also into vintage watches and also vintage Invictas. So I brought two of my own watches. So first I brought this 1970s chronograph produced by Invicta in Switzerland. As you can see, Swiss made. Very nice racing dial. Secondly, I brought this modern Invicta produced in 2020, but a reissue of a 1960s chronograph. So what has the old Invicta or the new Invicta to do with the old one? So as I said, Invicta was bankrupted in the 80s and just stopped. So begin early in the 90s, Aola Lalo bought Invicta and the brand, and he started to produce some cheaper, affordable wristwatches. In that time, mostly they were Swiss made, produced in Switzerland. And nowadays, most of their collection are not produced in Switzerland. As example, this new reissue, it's not produced in Switzerland, but and also inside is not a Swiss movement. There's a Japanese Seiko movement inside this movement inside this watch. Can we say that the modern Invicta doesn't have anything to do with the old vintage Invicta? I think it's my opinion that I can say the modern Invicta has something to do with the old Invicta. It's just a building on the old heritage. Invicta doesn't produce a lot of those old models, but they produce watches in the same spirit as the old Invicta. The old Invicta always produced watches of that time, the style that is popular for that time, the sizes, and they just produced standard watches with most time with generic movements. They just bought in and they put it inside their models. There's nothing different in that way with the modern Invicta. When we're talking about the vintage Invictas, they did design their own watches, but most time, 99% of the time, they bought the movement and they put it inside their watches. The modern Invicta, they design their own watches. Sometimes they do also an homage to an Rolex or to an Seiko or an other brands, but most time they produce their own watches, their own designs, but they bought the movement from Seiko, from Ronda, and they put it inside their watches. So we can say that Invicta just exactly do the same as the old Invicta did. Just in the same fashion, the same style, they're producing watches. The only thing you can say is that Invicta is keeping evolving just over the years. So when you're looking to the old vintage Invictas, you will see that they keep producing different kind of watches. Just over the years, Invicta didn't produce the same watches. When you see Rolex nowadays, they just keep pushing their heritage. They just keep close to their old models, the Rolex Submariner, and they just evolving that model. But when we're looking to vintage Invictas, they produce the model, keep evolving, and keep. As example, this one is produced in the 80s, but it's not a reissue of some older watch they produced in the 30s. When you have a chronograph from the 30s or the 40s, it's just a totally different watch. So here we have that one from the 80s. So and here we have one from the I think this one is from the 40s. I know that because of the movement. It's a very old Landeron. They just produced in the 40s. Very nice watch, but this one is 34 millimeters, so it's a very small, delicate chronograph. There's nothing wrong with that, but this golden chronograph, they stopped producing them just after the 50s, and you will not see this kind of style. I think that often. I think you don't even see it in the 80s when Invicta started producing some more sporty chronographs and sporty watches. And also, when you're looking to Invictas from the 80s, most time they are just a lot bigger. So the only thing you can complain when it's about old and new is that they switched from owner. Invicta, when it's about the old Invicta, the vintage watches, it was in the beginning. It was a family company with Raphael Picard. After that, his son, and after that, his grandson. But over the years, the track to the heritage to the Picard family was lost. Maybe there were some people in the 80s still alive, but they were not active watchmakers. They didn't have to do with the company that much anymore. So also when they got bankrupted, it was just the company just was sold to some holding, and after that sold to Eyal Lalo, and he started just to build up this company again from the ground up. Can we say that there are two companies? Yes and no, but I think we can say that about almost every watch company. There are a lot of different watch companies that are now owned by some bigger holding. As example, the Swatch Group has a lot of different brands within them. Is that a problem? I think it isn't, because if the Swatch Group wasn't there, we didn't have Omega anymore, and we didn't have ETA anymore, and such on. So there's nothing wrong with that. And without Eyal Lalo, we don't have Invicta anymore. But we can also look forward. Just as I gave as example, Invicta just started producing some reissues of their old vintage counterparts. So I hope to see more in the future. So I think it will be great if Invicta just keep producing such old reissues and do homage to their old heritage. What can I say? I think Invicta, the modern Invicta, has something to do with their old counterparts. They doesn't have the same owner, and they are not from the same family, but they are just producing watches in the same fashion and with the same spirit. So I get very often this question, and I hope I answer it. So let me know down below in the comments what you think about this. And if you like this video, give it a thumb up and like this video. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.